Have you ever just stopped and wondered why some of the smartest people in the world, absolute geniuses, make these massive, catastrophic mistakes? They've got all the money, all the data you could ever want, and yet they make these calls that end up costing millions, sometimes even sinking entire companies. It's kind of baffling, right? But it turns out there's a really simple idea that explains almost all of it.
So let's just get right into it. What is the secret? How do you consistently make fewer but better decisions, especially when the stakes are high? Well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not about being a genius who knows everything. In fact, it's pretty much the exact opposite. And that incredibly simple answer comes from, you guessed it, one of the most successful investors of all time, Warren Buffett. He says this one idea is the bedrock of his success. It's not about being brilliant across the board. It's about knowing exactly where your brilliant spots are and then having the discipline to just stay there.
Okay, so this simple rule, it has a name. It's a mental model that's used not just by Buffett, but by his partner, Charlie Munger, and a whole lot of other legendary thinkers. And it's called the circle of competence.
So what is it, really? Well, your circle of competence is basically any area where you have that deep, hard-won knowledge. And I'm not talking about something you read in a few blog posts or messed around with for a weekend. No, this is expertise that's been earned through years of actual experience of making mistakes and learning from them. And here is the absolute key takeaway. Buffett himself says the size of your circle doesn't matter one bit. You don't have to know everything. But what is absolutely vital, what you cannot afford to get wrong, is knowing exactly where the edge of that circle is, because all the danger, all the trouble, lives just outside that line.
So how do you know, right? How can you tell if you're operating safely inside your circle or if you're wandering out into the wilderness? It turns out it feels completely different, and you can totally learn to recognize the signs.
Yeah, the difference is night and day. When you're inside your circle, you have this gut feeling and intuition that's backed up by real experience. You know all the little hidden traps, all the gotchas. But when you're outside your circle, all you really have are impressions, usually from some slick marketing. You might know all the shiny features, but you have no clue how that thing is going to break on you at 3 in the morning. And Buffett's legendary partner, Charlie Munger, he nails it with this one. See, this whole thing isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the most intellectually honest. Just having the discipline to admit what you don't know, that's a superpower. It stops you from making those really dumb, but really expensive mistakes.
And look, this isn't some abstract philosophical idea. The consequences of ignoring the edge of your circle are very, very real. Investor Li Lu doesn't pull any punches here. When you start playing in a field where you don't have that deep knowledge, it's not a question of if you're going to get in trouble, it's just a matter of when. And believe me, when it happens, it is brutal. I mean, this is such a classic trap. Even a giant like Phil Fisher, one of the investing legends, he admitted that one of his biggest screw-ups was thinking that just because he was a genius in one area, that skill would magically transfer to something totally different. He stepped outside his circle and man, it cost him a ton of money. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, sure, this is great for billionaires playing with stocks, but what does this have to do with me? Well, it turns out this exact same drama is playing out every single day in the modern workplace, especially when it comes to technology. Let's look at a real-world case study from software engineering, a place where getting excited about a new idea can easily be confused with actually knowing what you're doing, often with disastrous results. So the story starts, and you've probably seen this before. A lead engineer goes to a big conference. They see this incredible talk about a shiny new database technology. The demo is perfect, the speaker is amazing, and they come back totally convinced it's the solution to all their problems.
And here's the catch. Their knowledge was a mile wide and an inch deep. They did all the tutorials, they read the docs, but not a single person on that team had ever actually tried to run this thing in a live, high-stakes production environment. They had walked right over the boundary of their circle and didn't even know it.
So after a year and a half of pain, struggle, and eventually having to rewrite everything to go back to the old system, what was the final price tag for that one mistake? Roughly $400,000 in completely wasted engineering time. Ouch. And this kind of story isn't a one-off. It happens constantly, and it usually falls into one of these 3 traps. First, you've got conference-driven architecture, where a great sales pitch beats real experience. Then there's resume-driven development, choosing tech just because it looks good on a resume. And finally, my favorite, The Netflix fallacy, thinking you can use Netflix's tools without Netflix's army of engineers to support them. Every single one is a classic violation of the circle of competence.
And the author of the article this is all based on, William Wang, he admits he did this exact thing himself. He pushed his team to adopt a massive new architecture based on what he'd read. He understood the cool benefits, but he had zero real-world experience with the crushing operational costs. He calls the result his own personal year of pain. All right, so we've seen the problem. We've seen how expensive it is to get this wrong. So the big question now is, how do we actually use this idea to make better decisions for ourselves? Luckily, there's a really practical way to do it.
Here's the playbook. First, you have to honestly map out your circle. Be real about what your team knows deeply versus what's just surface level. Second, match the risk to your competence. If it's a small, low-risk project, go ahead and experiment. But if it's a core piece of your business, you better make damn sure it's deep inside your circle. Third, figure out the real cost of expanding your circle. It takes serious time and money. And finally, step 4, just hire to expand. The fastest, safest way to get good at something new is to bring in an expert who's already lived it.
Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to this. The real danger isn't being ignorant. We're all ignorant about most things. The real danger is being ignorant of your ignorance. Thinking you know something when you really don't, that's the fastest way to drive off a cliff. And I really want to be clear. This idea isn't about limiting yourself or being afraid to try new things. Not at all. It's about being smart and strategic. It's about focusing your energy on building real, deep expertise and having the self-awareness to know when you're on solid ground and when you're on thin ice.
So I'm going to leave you with this one final powerful test. The next time you have a big decision to make, your next great idea, ask yourself this question. If you can honestly, truly say yes to that, then congratulations. You are standing firm right in the center of your circle of competence.